The day Derek brought his parents to meet us was the same day he first laid eyes on my truck. I still remember his expression, that smug little half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes as he stared at my faded blue '56 Ford F-100 sitting in our driveway. "Is that thing even street legal?" he'd asked, not bothering to lower his voice as he guided his parents toward our front door. "We should have just had them over to our place instead," he muttered to Jessica. My daughter gave him a look that could have stripped paint, but said nothing as she welcomed her future in-laws into our home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Little did Derek know that the old heap of junk he so casually dismissed would soon become the very thing he'd begged to get his hands on. That's the thing about people who judge too quickly. They rarely see what's right in front of them until it's too late. I never set out to be a mechanic. Growing up in Millbrook in the 1970s, girls weren't exactly encouraged to get engine grease under their fingernails. But my father, bless him, never had sons, just me and the old Pontiac Firebird he was forever tinkering with in our garage. "Maggie," he'd say, "hand me that socket wrench." And before long, I wasn't just handing him tools, I was using them myself. By 18, I could take apart an engine and put it back together with my eyes closed. By 25, I had my mechanical engineering degree and was the only woman working at Millbrook Motors. And by 35, I owned the place, renamed it Wilson's Auto Shop, and had built a reputation that stretched 3 counties over. "Margaret Wilson doesn't fix cars," people would say. She whispers to them. The truck came into my life purely by accident. It was 1988, and I was driving back from a parts supplier when I spotted a hand-painted estate sale sign on the edge of town. On a whim, I turned down the long gravel driveway. The property belonged to an elderly man who had recently passed away, a local farmer who, according to his daughter, collected more junk than crops. Behind his weathered barn, covered in a tattered tarp and nearly swallowed by tall grass, sat the truck. It was love at first sight. The farmer's daughter was happy to take the $800 I offered, probably thinking she'd fleeced me. The truck didn't even start. The paint was faded to a ghost of its original blue, and there was a family of mice living in the glove compartment. But something about that F-100 spoke to me. Thomas, my husband, just shook his head when I had it towed to our garage. "Another project, Mags?" he'd asked with that patient smile I'd fallen in love with when we were both still in high school. I spent the next 3 years restoring that truck. Not to make it shiny and new, there was plenty of beauty in its aged patina, but to make it mechanically perfect. Every part I couldn't salvage, I replaced with genuine Ford originals, hunting them down at swap meets and through a growing network of fellow enthusiasts. The engine purred like the day it left the factory. The leather seats were cracked but comfortable, carefully conditioned to preserve their character. It wasn't a showpiece, it was better. It was history you could drive. And drive it I did, nearly, every day for over 30 years. To work, to the grocery store, to pick up Jessica from soccer practice. That truck became as much a part of me as my own hands. When Jessica brought Derek home for the first time 5 years ago, I knew immediately. He wasn't cut from the same cloth as us. His shoes were too shiny, his smile too practiced. But she was in love. And who was I to judge? I'd built my career proving people wrong about their assumptions. "Mom drives that old thing everywhere," Jessica had explained when Derek commented. "On the truck? It's practically family." Derek had laughed, a polite sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, we all have our quirks, I suppose. My mother collects porcelain figurines." As if my truck, my history, my passion, was equivalent to knickknacks gathering dust on a shelf. After they got engaged, the comments became more frequent. "You know, Maggie," he'd say in that condescending tone that set my teeth on edge, "I could get you a great deal on a new SUV. Something safer, more reliable." This truck was built when they still made things to last, I'd reply evenly. It'll outlive both of us. He'd smile that empty smile and change the subject. The day he brought his parents to meet us was the final straw. Richard and Elaine Harrington were exactly as I'd pictured them. Polished, reserved, evaluating everything around them like potential investments. When Richard spotted my truck in the driveway, his eyebrows had shot up toward his receding hairline. "Is that yours?" he'd asked, pointing with his monogrammed handkerchief. "Yes," I'd replied simply. "Since 1988. "How rustic," Elaine had murmured, exchanging a look with her son that said volumes. Thomas, bless him, had squeezed my hand under the table at dinner as Derek regaled his parents with stories about the new development he was overseeing, Lakeview Heights, where he and Jessica had recently purchased a home. A home, I couldn't help noticing, that was far from the modest neighborhoods where Jessica had grown up. "We've got the Mitchells moving in next door," Derek was saying. "He's the regional director at First National, and the Porter's just across the street. She's a surgeon." "Sounds like you'll be in good company," Richard approved, cutting his roast beef with surgical precision. "Unlike this neighborhood," Derek added, glancing out our dining room window at the mixed collection of homes on our street. "No HOA to maintain standards. Did you see the house 2 doors down? The one with the," he made a face, "lawn ornaments?" "Those lawn ornaments are Ted Baker's metal sculptures," Thomas said mildly. "He's a celebrated local artist." Derek shrugged. "All I know is they're dragging down property values." Elaine turned to Jessica with a tight smile. "We're just glad you found somewhere more suitable to start a family." Jessica's cheeks flushed. "Mom and Dad's neighborhood has character. Everyone knows everyone." "That's one way to put it," Derek muttered. I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to check on dessert, but really to swallow the retort burning in my throat. Thomas followed. A moment later, wrapping his arms around my waist as I aggressively sliced the apple pie. "They're just different from us, Mags," he whispered. "It doesn't make them bad people." "I know," I sighed. "But does our daughter know that?" That night, after everyone had left, I went out to the garage and sat in my truck. The familiar creak of the door, the smooth, worn texture of the steering wheel under my hands, it centered me. This vehicle had carried me through decades of my life. It had witnessed Jessica's first day of school, Thomas's retirement celebration, the day we scattered my father's ashes. It wasn't just metal and machinery. It was memory given form. The next morning, Ellie Martinez called. We'd been best friends since high school and business partners until we sold the auto shop 5 years ago. She still kept her ear to the ground in the automotive world. "Maggie, you'll never guess who I just got off the phone with," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "Catherine Reynolds." I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Catherine "Cat" Reynolds was a legend in the classic car world, one of the first women to break into the upper echelons of car collecting and restoration. Her personal collection was world-renowned, and her opinion could make or break a vehicle's value on the auction block. "What did she want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's putting together a special exhibition for the East Coast Classics Show. Women behind the wheel, female-owned historic vehicles. I mentioned your F-100 and she's interested. Really interested." My heart skipped a beat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Ellie, you know I don't do car shows. My truck's not pristine enough for those competitions." "That's exactly why she wants it," Ellie countered. "This isn't about over-restored trailer queens. It's about vehicles with stories, with character, cars, and trucks that have been actually driven and loved by women over decades. She wants authenticity." I hesitated. The East Coast Classics was the premier automotive event in our region. Hundreds of vehicles, thousands of spectators, and coverage. In every car magazine worth reading. I don't know, Elle. Just think about it, she urged. Kat's coming to town next week. She wants to see the truck herself. After we hung up, I sat staring at the kitchen wall, my mind racing. Part of me was thrilled at the recognition that someone of Kat Reynolds's caliber would be interested in my humble F-100. Another part was terrified. I'd never sought validation for my truck. I loved it regardless of what anyone else thought. But then Derek's dismissive smirk flashed in my mind, and before I could talk myself out of it, I called Ellie back. Tell her yes, I said firmly. She can come see the truck. The following Saturday, I spent the morning in the garage, not changing anything about the truck. It was what it was, but making sure it was clean, that every lovingly maintained mechanical element was in perfect working order. Thomas brought me coffee and watched from his perch on the workbench. So, who exactly is this woman again? He asked. I wiped my hands on a rag. Only the most respected female voice in classic car collecting. She started when the field was even more male-dominated than it is now. Built her collection from nothing into one of the most valuable in the country. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like someone else I know. I threw the rag at him playfully. I've got one old truck, not a multi-million-dollar collection. Still, he said, catching the rag, you've got more in common with her than you think. When Kat Reynolds pulled into our driveway at precisely 1 p.m., it wasn't in the luxury sedan I'd expected, but in a perfectly maintained 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, its Nassau blue paint gleaming in the sunlight. The message was clear. She might be a serious collector, but she drove her classics. Kat herself was tall, silver-haired, and dressed in crisp jeans and a button-down shirt, with none of the pretension I'd feared. She greeted me with a firm handshake and warm smile. Margaret Wilson, she said, I've heard good things about your shop over the years. You've got quite a reputation for honest work. Thank you, I replied, oddly touched. And please, call me Maggie. When I led her to the garage and unveiled the truck, she circled it slowly, her expression unreadable. She ran her hand along the fender, peered underneath at the chassis, and finally asked for the keys. Mind if I start her up? I handed them over, trying not to show my nervousness. The truck fired up on the first try, settling into the smooth idle I'd perfected over the years. Kat listened intently, then checked under the hood, nodding appreciatively at the immaculate engine bay. You've done all the work yourself? She asked, though it didn't really sound like a question. Every bolt, I confirmed. And you've got documentation? Service records, parts receipts, that sort of thing? I pointed to the steel filing cabinet in the corner. Every repair, every part, every oil change for 35 years. Kat's professional demeanor cracked into a genuine smile. I thought as much. You know what you have here, don't you, Maggie? I blinked, confused. A well-maintained F-100? She laughed, a rich, unexpected sound. Well, yes. But more specifically, you have a 1956 Ford F-100 with the ultra-rare special equipment package and the correct Y-block V8. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the optional deluxe cab. I nodded slowly. Yes, but you probably don't realize just how few of these survived with their original specifications intact. She closed the hood gently. Most were worked to death on farms and construction sites. Others were modified beyond recognition. A documented, largely original example like this, maintained by the same owner for decades. She shook her head in admiration. It's a unicorn, Maggie. My throat felt suddenly dry. A unicorn? In collecting terms, that's a vehicle so rare and desirable it's almost mythical. She leaned against the fender, arms crossed. I'd estimate its value, conservatively, at around $80,000 to $100,000. possibly more to the right buyer. The garage seemed to tilt around me. That can't be right, I managed. It's just my old truck. Kat's expression softened. It's never just a truck, is it? Not to the people who truly care for them. By the time she left, I had agreed to bring the F-100 to the East Coast Classics show the following month. Kat was confident it would not only be accepted, but featured prominently in the special exhibition. We'll need to do a video interview about your history with the truck, she'd explained. The stories are as important as the vehicle itself. I hadn't told Thomas about the valuation. Somehow, putting a price tag on my beloved truck felt wrong, like I'd be reducing it to a commodity. But that night, as we got ready for bed, he noticed my distraction. So, what did the car guru think? He asked, climbing under the covers. She liked it, I said simply. Wants me to bring it to the show. Thomas waited, knowing there was more. I sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. She says it's rare, special, worth a lot of money. My husband's eyebrows rose, but he just nodded thoughtfully. Can't say I'm surprised. You've always had an eye for quality, Mags. I didn't buy it because I thought it was valuable, I said quickly. I didn't even know. Of course you didn't. He took my hand. You bought it because you loved it. The value just confirms what you already knew, that you saw something special when no one else did. I squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. I'm not selling it, no matter what it's worth. I never thought you would, he replied with a smile. The next day, Jessica called to invite us to Sunday brunch at their house. It had become something of a tradition since they'd moved into Lakeview Heights, a chance for her to show off her growing skills in the kitchen and for Derek to play host in their immaculately decorated home. Normally, I dreaded these brunches, with their subtle undercurrent of, look how much better we live now. But this time I found myself looking forward to it. Not because I planned to boast about the truck's newfound value. I hadn't even told Jessica yet, but because I felt a quiet confidence I hadn't realized I'd been missing. When Sunday arrived, Thomas and I climbed into the F-100 and headed across town to the sprawling Victorian that Jessica and Derek had purchased. As always, I couldn't help noticing how the homes grew larger and the lawns more manicured the closer we got to Lakeview Heights. By the time we turned onto their street, every house looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. We parked behind Derek's gleaming BMW in the driveway. As we walked to the front door, I heard voices from the backyard. Jessica's laugh and another woman's voice I didn't recognize. Thomas rang the doorbell, and Derek answered, dressed in what he probably considered casual attire, pressed khakis, and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Tom, Maggie, come on in, he greeted us, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. He glanced past us to the driveway. Still driving that old thing, I see. Wouldn't drive anything else, I replied cheerfully, refusing to let his tone bother me. He led us through their house, all hardwood floors and neutral colors, lovely but somehow sterile, to the back patio where Jessica was chatting with a woman about her age. Mom, Dad. Jessica hurried over to hug us. I want you to meet our neighbor, Claire Mitchell. Claire, these are my parents, Maggie and Thomas. Claire was elegantly dressed in what I recognized as the uniform of Lakeview Heights. Expensive, casual wear that looked effortless but definitely wasn't. Still, her smile seemed genuine as she shook our hands. Jessica's told me so much about you both, she said warmly. Especially about your auto shop, Maggie. My husband is something of a car enthusiast himself, though I'm afraid his knowledge is limited to writing checks for other people to work on them. Derek chuckled. Greg's got quite the collection, though. Tell them, Claire. Claire looked slightly embarrassed. Oh, it's nothing really. Greg just has a weakness for German engineering. A few Porsches, a vintage Mercedes. The 300 SL Gullwing. Is hardly nothing, Derek interjected, naming a car even I knew was worth 7 figures. Greg keeps it in a climate-controlled garage, Won't even drive it in the rain. I caught Thomas's eye, sharing a private smile. Our decades-old truck, driven in all weather, suddenly didn't seem so out of place in this conversation. Some cars are meant to be driven, I said mildly. Others are just for looking at, I suppose. Derek shot me a condescending look. Well, there's a difference between collectible classics and just old vehicles. Speaking of which, Jessica interrupted, clearly trying to change the subject. How's the truck running, Mom? Still reliable? Smooth as the day it was built, I replied. Actually, I've been invited to show it at the East Coast Classics next month. The words were out before I could stop them. I hadn't planned to mention it, especially not in front of Derek, but something about his dismissive attitude had pushed me. There was a moment of surprised silence. Jessica recovered first. Mom, that's amazing. East Coast Classics is a huge deal. Derek looked skeptical. They're letting in. Trucks like yours? It's for a special exhibition, I explained, keeping my voice neutral. Women behind the wheel. Catherine Reynolds personally invited me. Claire's eyes widened. Catherine Reynolds? The collector? Greg has several of her books. He tried to buy a car from her collection once, but she turned him down flat. Said it belonged in a museum, not a private garage. Derek's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. I could practically see him reassessing the situation, trying to determine if there was something about my truck, about me, that he'd missed. Well, he said finally, that's interesting. I didn't realize those old farm trucks were considered classics. Some vehicles become valuable because they're rare, I replied, unable to resist the opening. Only a few hundred of my model with its specific options were ever made, and fewer still survived intact. Now Derek was definitely paying attention. Intact? Yours looks… well, let's just say it shows its age. Original patina is highly valued in collector circles, Claire interjected before I could respond. Isn't that right, Maggie? Greg's always talking about how over-restoration can actually decrease value. I smiled gratefully at her. Exactly. It's about authenticity. Derek excused himself to check on the quiche in the oven, but I could tell he was processing this new information. Throughout brunch, he kept steering the conversation back to cars. Collectors, auctions, clearly fishing for more details about my truck's potential value without asking directly. I didn't take the bait. Each time, I redirected the conversation, asking Claire about her work, pediatric psychiatry, or telling Jessica about the new community garden project Thomas and I had joined. Let Derek wonder. For once, I was enjoying having the upper hand. As Thomas and I were leaving, Derek walked us to the truck, suddenly very interested in its details. So, this Y-block engine, he said, peering under the hood after I'd opened it at his request. I've heard these are getting harder to find. Nearly impossible in original condition, I confirmed, watching him reassess the greasy old engine with new eyes. And you've had this. How long did you say? 35 years. He nodded thoughtfully, closing the hood with unexpected gentleness. You know, Maggie, I might have been too quick to judge this truck. It has a certain character. I bit back a smile. It certainly does. As we drove away, Thomas burst out laughing. Well, that was a change of tune. What happened to that old heap? I grinned. Amazing how a little context changes perception, isn't it? You didn't tell him what Kat said about its value, Thomas observed. I shook my head. And I'm not going to. Let him do his own research, if he's that interested. You're a little scary sometimes, Mags, Thomas said with admiration. You know that? I just smiled and patted the truck's dashboard affectionately. We're just getting started. The following week, I found myself in unfamiliar territory, researching my own truck online. After Kat's visit, I was curious about what exactly made my F100 so special. Thomas caught me scrolling through classic car forums late one night, squinting at the screen in the dim light of our home office. "Doing some light reading?" he asked, setting a cup of chamomile tea beside me. "Just trying to understand," I murmured, gesturing at the screen. According to these collectors, the special equipment package on the 56F100 included the larger V8, the chrome grille, and these specific trim pieces. Apparently, most of them were ordered for fleet vehicles that got worked to death. Thomas leaned over my shoulder, scanning the text. "And yours survived because the original owner, the farmer I bought it from, only used it for Sunday drives and trips to town. His work truck was something else entirely." I took a sip of tea, thinking back to what the farmer's daughter had told me all those years ago. He bought it as a treat for himself after a good harvest year. It was his pride and joy. "Like it's been yours," Thomas said softly, squeezing my shoulder. I nodded, unable to express how strange it felt to see dollar signs attached to something I valued for entirely different reasons. The forum users were discussing recent auctions where similar trucks, though none as original as mine, had sold for impressive sums. A chime from my phone interrupted my thoughts. It was a text from Jessica. "Dad wants to know if you're free tomorrow. He'd like to see the truck." I read it aloud to Thomas, who raised an eyebrow. "Dad? Since when does Derek call you Dad?" "Since he found out our old truck might be worth something," I replied dryly, though in truth, the sudden interest in family ties stung more than I wanted to admit. I texted back that I'd be home all day, and Derek was welcome to stop by. Then I closed the laptop and stood up, stretching my stiff back. "Let's go to bed. I've seen enough dollar signs for one night." Thomas wrapped his arm around my waist as we walked upstairs. "Just remember, Mags, no matter what that truck is worth to anyone else, its real value is what it means to you." I leaned my head against his shoulder, grateful for the millionth time that I'd married a man who understood me so completely. Derek arrived the next day precisely at noon, dressed in what I assumed was his idea of casual Saturday wear, crisp chinos and a polo shirt, as if he were headed to a country club rather than a garage. He'd brought coffee from an expensive shop downtown, a peace offering perhaps. "Maggie," he greeted me with newfound warmth, handing me a cup. "Thanks for making time. Jessica mentioned you're getting ready for that car show? East Coast?" "Classics," I confirmed, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "It's still a few weeks away, but there's paperwork to complete, interviews to schedule." "Interviews?" His eyebrows shot up. "For the exhibition catalog. Each vehicle comes with its owner's story." "Fascinating," he said, with what appeared to be genuine interest. "I've been doing some reading about classic trucks since our brunch. Never realized there was such a market for them." I led him to the garage, hiding my amusement at his transparent attempt to sound knowledgeable. The truck sat where it always did, bathed in the soft light filtering through the high windows of my workshop. Derek approached it with a reverence. That would have been comical if it weren't so calculated. He circled the vehicle slowly, occasionally nodding as if confirming something to himself. "The patina is remarkable," he said, using the term he'd clearly just learned from Claire. "And the original chrome trim. That's part of the special equipment package, right?" "Right," I confirmed, leaning against my workbench, "along with the V8 engine and the deluxe cab interior." He peered through the window at the bench seat with its weathered leather. "May I?" he asked, gesturing at the door. "Go ahead." He opened the driver's side door carefully, as if handling a museum piece, and slid onto the seat. His hands gripped the large steering wheel, and for a moment, something genuine flashed across his face. A boyish excitement that reminded me of the little boys who used to press their noses against the windows of our auto shop, dreaming of the day they could drive. The moment passed quickly as he composed himself. "The original radio still works?" "Everything works," I said simply. That was always the point for me. Not how it looked, but how it ran. He nodded, running his hand over the dashboard. "Jessica, Mentioned you bought this for... What was it? $800. In 1988. Derek whistled softly. And now it's worth... I met his questioning gaze steadily. I never bought it as an investment, Derek. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Of course not, but still, you must be pleased it's appreciated. He cleared his throat. Claire's husband, Greg, you remember, our neighbor. He was quite impressed when I mentioned your truck. Apparently, he's been looking for a 50s F100 for years. Never found one in original condition. They're out there, I said. Just rare. He'd love to see it sometime, Derek continued carefully. If you wouldn't mind, he's quite the collector. I shrugged. He's welcome to come to the show like everyone else. Derek exited the truck, closing the door with exaggerated care about that. I was thinking Jessica and I could help you prepare. Maybe handle some of the paperwork, help with the presentation. I know people who could create informational materials, maybe even get you some media coverage. I crossed my arms, studying his eager expression. Why? The directness of my question seemed to throw him. Why? Well, because it's a family asset, isn't it? We should support each other. It wasn't a family asset when you called it an embarrassing old heap, I pointed out, or when you suggested I should trade it in for something more appropriate, for a woman my age. Derek flushed, his composure cracking slightly. That's not fair, Maggie. I didn't understand its significance then. Its significance? I echoed. You mean its monetary value? He spread his hands in a placating gesture. I admit, learning about its collector status has made me see it differently. Is that so wrong? I'm trying to appreciate what you've preserved. Here. I softened my stance slightly, reminding myself that Derek was Jessica's choice, for better or worse. Look, I understand collector culture can be fascinating once you're exposed to it, but this truck has been significant to me for 35 years, not because of what it might sell for, but because of what it represents. Which is? He asked, actually seeming interested in my answer. Independence, perseverance, the value of maintaining something instead of replacing it. I ran my hand along the truck's fender. Every ding and scratch tells a story. The dent in the passenger door? That's from when Jessica was learning to ride a bike and crashed into it. The scratch along the side? That's from the time Thomas and I drove it down to the creek for our 20th anniversary picnic and scraped against a tree branch. Derek was quiet for a moment, perhaps realizing for the first time that the vehicle he'd dismissed was actually a repository of family history. I didn't know, he said finally. You never asked. He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. So, about the show. Can I help in any way? No strings attached. I considered his offer, trying to gauge his sincerity. I could use some help with the display materials, I admitted. I'm not much for graphic design or fancy presentations. His face brightened. That's perfect. I'm good at that sort of thing. Jessica mentioned you have photos of the truck from over the years? Albums full of them, I confirmed. Some from when I first bought it, others throughout the restoration process. Great. We could create a timeline display, show the journey. His enthusiasm seemed genuine now, his marketing mind already spinning possibilities. Would you be willing to share some of the technical details? Collectors eat that stuff up. I found myself warming to his interest, despite my reservations. I have all the original documentation, build sheets, parts catalogs, even the factory service manual. Perfect. Derek pulled out his phone and started making notes. I could come by next weekend with Jessica, scan some of the photos, get the timeline started. I agreed, and as he left, his parting handshake was firmer, his smile more authentic than I'd ever seen it. I watched him drive away in his luxury sedan, wondering if I'd just witnessed genuine growth or simply the awakening of opportunistic interest. Thomas found me still standing in the driveway, lost in thought. "How'd it go with your new biggest fan?" he asked, the corners of his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Surprisingly well," I admitted. "He's offered to help with the display materials for the show." "Generous of him," Thomas observed. "Yes." I trailed off, unsure how to articulate my mixed feelings. Thomas draped his arm around my shoulders. "You're worried his interest is just about the truck's value, not about building a relationship with us." I looked up at my husband's understanding face. "Am I that transparent?" "Only to me," he assured me. "And look at it this way, even if his initial motivation is materialistic, at least it's gotten him interested in something you care about. It's a starting point." "When did you get so wise?" I asked, leaning into him. "Around the same time my hair turned gray," he replied with a laugh. "Come on, I made lunch." True to his word, Derek arrived the following weekend with Jessica in tow, armed with a high-resolution scanner and a laptop loaded with design software. Jessica seemed bemused by her husband's newfound enthusiasm for her mother's truck, but pleased to see us getting along. "I've never seen him so excited about an old vehicle," she confided as we dug through albums in the living room while Derek set up his equipment on the dining table. "Usually, he only gets this animated about new construction materials or property values." "People can surprise you," I replied, pulling out a particularly thick album labeled 1988-1990, Restoration Phase 1. Jessica paused, an album from the early 2000s in her hands. "Mom, I want to apologize for some of the things Derek said about the truck. I should have stood up for you more." I squeezed her hand. "It's all right, sweetie. People value different things." "But that's just it," she insisted. "I grew up with this truck. I know what it means to you, to us as a family. I shouldn't have let him dismiss it just because it didn't fit his idea of success." Her words warmed my heart. Whatever differences Jessica and I had, and there were many, she hadn't forgotten the values we'd raised her with. "Hey, I found the one from my high school graduation," she called out to Derek, pulling a photo from the album. "Mom and Dad picked me up in the truck, and I was so embarrassed because all my friends' parents had new cars." Derek looked up from his scanner with interest. "Let me see." She brought it over, a snapshot of a teenage Jessica in cap and gown, standing reluctantly beside the truck while Thomas and I beamed proudly. "You know what's funny?" she said, looking at it now. "Madison Chen, remember her? The girl whose parents had the brand new Mercedes? She messaged me on Facebook last year. Turns out she always thought our family was cool because Mom could fix anything, and we went camping in this awesome vintage truck." Derek studied the photo thoughtfully. "Perception is a funny thing," he said, more to himself than to us. "We think we know what others value, but we're often wrong." I exchanged a surprised look with Jessica. Perhaps there was more depth to Derek than I'd given him credit for. The afternoon passed pleasantly as we sorted through decades of photos. Derek scanned the best ones, occasionally asking questions about specific modifications or maintenance challenges. His interest seemed increasingly genuine, his questions more thoughtful than merely assessing value. "You replaced the transmission in 1995, he asked, looking up from a series of photos showing the truck with its undercarriage exposed. "Had to," I explained. "The original finally gave out after nearly 40 years of service. I found a period-correct replacement at a salvage yard in Pittsburgh." "And you installed it yourself?" "That's impressive." "It's what I do," I said, simply. Or did, before retirement. He nodded slowly. "Jessica told me you built your business from nothing. Started as the only female mechanic at, what was it?" "Millbrook Motors," I supplied. "Back when most people thought women didn't belong under the hood. And now you're being featured in a major car show," he mused. "That's quite a journey." For the first time, I felt that Derek was seeing me, not just as Jessica's mother or as the owner of a potentially valuable truck, but as a person with my own history of accomplishments. After they left, laden with scanned photos and notes, for the display, Thomas helped me return the albums to their shelves. "That went better than expected," he remarked. I nodded, still processing the shift in Derek's attitude. He seems genuinely interested in the truck's history now, not just its price tag. "Sometimes people just need their perspectives broadened," Thomas said. "Derek's world is all about new development, property values, moving up in the world. Maybe seeing something old that's actually valuable is changing how he measures worth." "Maybe," I agreed, though part of me remained cautious. Years of experience had taught me that true change rarely happens overnight. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation for the show. Kat Reynolds called several times with updates and questions for the exhibition catalog. Derek emailed drafts of the display materials, impressively professional and, to my surprise, focused more on the truck's history and my journey with it than on its monetary value. Jessica stopped by one afternoon while Thomas was at his volunteer shift at the community workshop. She brought sandwiches from our favorite local deli and a twinkle in her eye that suggested she had news. "Derek's been obsessed with your truck," she said as we sat at the kitchen table. "He's been researching classic Fords every night, got himself invited to Greg's garage to see his collection, even subscribed to 3 different classic car magazines." I took a bite of my sandwich to hide my smile. New hobbies are good for people. "It's more than that," Jessica insisted. "He's been different since he found out about the truck's value. More respectful when he talks about your neighborhood, your background." She hesitated. "I think he's realizing there's more than one way to measure success." I chose my words carefully. That's a valuable lesson for anyone to learn. "The funny thing is," she continued, "his father called last night, and Derek actually stood up to him. Richard was going on about how the right schools and right connections are essential, and Derek interrupted him to say that some of the most successful people he knows built everything from the ground up without any of those advantages." She grinned at me. "He was talking about you, Mom." I felt a complicated mix of emotions, pride, hope, but also lingering skepticism. One enlightened moment doesn't change a person's entire worldview, Jess. "I know," she acknowledged, "but it's a start, and I think—" She hesitated again. "I think maybe I needed to hear it too. I've been so caught up in Derek's world, the nice house, the prestigious neighborhood, the right social circles. Sometimes I forget where I came from, what you and Dad taught me about what really matters." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You haven't forgotten. Not really. Those values are still in you, even if they get overshadowed sometimes." She squeezed back, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Anyway, Derek wants to know if you'd be willing to let him drive the truck. Just around the block. He's never driven a classic vehicle, and he's curious about how it feels." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "He wants to drive it? My old Heap?" Jessica laughed. "He hasn't called it that in weeks. Please, Mom. It would mean a lot to him." I considered the request. Derek behind the wheel of my beloved truck. It was something I couldn't have imagined a month ago. But people did change. Sometimes, or at least they could grow. "All right," I agreed. "Tell him to come by this weekend, but he has to promise to treat it with respect." "He will," Jessica assured me. "He's like a kid with a new toy when it comes to this truck now." After she left, I went out to the garage and sat in the truck, running my hands over the familiar steering wheel. I thought about Derek driving. Experiencing the mechanical honesty of a vehicle built in a simpler time. Would he feel what I felt? The connection to history, the satisfaction of something maintained through decades of care? Or would he just be cataloging another experience, adding to his mental portfolio of assets and opportunities? Saturday arrived clear and warm, perfect driving weather. Derek showed up promptly at 10, dressed in jeans and a casual button-down. The jeans looked new, as if purchased specifically for this occasion, but it was still the most relaxed I'd ever seen him dressed. "Thanks for this opportunity, Maggie," he said, his eagerness barely contained. "I've been reading about the Y-Block V8, how different it feels from modern engines." "Reading is one thing," I replied, leading him to the garage. "Experiencing is another." I gave him a thorough briefing on the truck's quirks, the heavy clutch, the manual steering that required actual effort, the brakes that needed more pressure than modern systems. He listened attentively, nodding and asking intelligent questions. "No power steering, no power brakes, no electronic aids of any kind," I concluded. "Just you, the machine, and the road. That's what driving used to be." "Sounds liberating," he said, and I was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. I handed him the keys, the original Ford key with its simple design, worn smooth by decades of use. "Just around the block," I cautioned. "Take it slow, get a feel for it before trying anything more ambitious." Derek nodded solemnly, accepting the keys as if I'd handed him the crown jewels. He slid into the driver's seat, taking a moment to adjust to the different seating position, the clear sight lines unobstructed by modern safety pillars. I walked around to the passenger side and got in beside him. "Clutch is heavy," I reminded him, "and the shifter throw is longer than you're used to." He nodded, inserting the key and turning it. The engine caught immediately, settling into its characteristic smooth idle. Derek's face broke into a spontaneous grin at the sound, a deep, throaty rumble so different from the muted purr of modern engines. "That's something else," he said appreciatively. "That's what American iron sounds like," I replied with pride. He pressed the clutch, wincing slightly at the effort required, and carefully moved the shifter into first gear. The truck rolled forward smoothly as he released the clutch, only a slight jerk betraying his unfamiliarity with the heavy pedal. "Easy does it," I encouraged. "There's no rush." We drove slowly down our street, Derek gradually growing more confident with the truck's controls. At the first intersection, he stopped perhaps a bit more abruptly than necessary, then proceeded with careful deliberation. "It's so physical," he commented as we turned onto a wider road. "You really have to drive it. It doesn't do anything for you." "That's the point," I said. "It's a relationship, not a service." He nodded, seeming to understand. As we completed the circuit around the block and approached my house again, I could see he was reluctant for the experience to end. "One more block?" he asked hopefully. I hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead. Take the next right." His face lit up like a boy granted an unexpected privilege. The second loop went even smoother, his movements becoming more fluid as he adjusted to the truck's rhythms. When we finally returned to the garage, Derek shut off the engine and sat for a moment in silence, his hands still resting on the steering wheel. "Thank you," he said finally. "That was eye-opening." "How so?" I asked, curious about his experience. He thought for a moment before answering. "In my BMW, I'm transported. The car does the work, and I'm just along for the ride. But this," he patted the dashboard affectionately, "this demands your full attention, your active participation. You're not just a passenger, you're a driver in the truest sense." I nodded, pleased by his insight. "That's exactly it. And it's not just the driving," he continued thoughtfully. "It's knowing that this machine has endured for nearly 70 years because someone cared enough to maintain it properly. There's something profound about that in our throwaway culture." I studied him with new interest. "That's a surprisingly philosophical take, Derek." He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About value, about legacy." He handed me back the keys with genuine respect. "Thank you for preserving this piece of history." As we exited the truck, Jessica pulled into the driveway, returning from her morning yoga class. She approached us with curious eyes. "How was it?" she asked Derek. "Incredible," he replied with unfeigned enthusiasm. "Your mom's truck is the real deal. Nothing like anything I've ever driven." Jessica smiled, linking her arm through his. "So you get it now? Why she loves it so much?" Derek glanced at me, then back at his wife. "I'm starting to. It's not just a vehicle, it's a connection to something authentic, something that lasts." Jessica's expression softened as she looked between us. "That's what I grew up with, you know. Mom and Dad taught me that things worth having are worth maintaining, whether it's a truck, a home, or a relationship." Derek nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "I've been focused on the next new thing for so long, I think I forgot to appreciate things that stand the test of time." I exchanged a glance with Jessica, seeing in her eyes a quiet hope that this newfound appreciation might extend beyond just the truck. "Would you like to stay for lunch?" I offered, surprising myself with the invitation. "Thomas is making his famous chili." "We'd love to," Jessica answered quickly, before Derek could respond. "Wouldn't we, honey?" "Absolutely," he agreed, with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "I'd like to ask your dad about that community workshop he volunteers at. Greg mentioned they restore old tools there?" As we walked toward the house, I felt a cautious optimism stirring. Perhaps this old truck, which had carried me through so many of life's journeys, was now helping to build an unexpected bridge between very different worlds. The East Coast Classics show was scheduled for the last weekend in May, held at the Montgomery Exhibition Hall in downtown Millbrook. As the date approached, I found myself oddly nervous. Not about the truck's reception, but about stepping into the spotlight. I'd spent my career fixing things, not showing them off. Thomas sensed my unease as we prepared for bed the night before we were scheduled to deliver the truck to the exhibition hall. "You know," he said, watching me fuss with my outfit for the next day. "For someone who's faced down sexist mechanics and demanding customers for 40 years, you're awfully worried about a bunch of car enthusiasts." I sighed, hanging up the third blouse I'd rejected. "It's different. In the shop, I knew what I was doing. My expertise was never in question, but this, being judged on something so personal." Thomas came over and wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Mags, that truck is going to be one of the stars of the show, and not because of what it's worth monetarily. It's the story that makes it special. Your story." I leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise," he replied with a smile I could hear in his voice. "Just ask me, I'll tell you." The next morning brought unexpected reinforcements. Not only were Jessica and Derek at our door bright and early to help transport the display materials, but Ellie had also arrived with coffee and pastries for everyone. "Can't let my best friend face the collector crowd alone," she declared, handing out the coffee. "Besides, I want to see their faces when they realize a woman rebuilt that engine." The truck was already cleaned and ready, not detailed to a sterile shine like many show vehicles would be, but carefully washed, its honest patina preserved, its mechanicals in perfect order. Derek had produced remarkably professional display, boards featuring a timeline of the truck's history, close-up photos of key features, and even a section devoted to my career as a mechanic and auto shop owner. "These are amazing," I told him, genuinely impressed as we loaded them into Thomas's SUV. "You've really captured the story." Derek beamed with pride. "Wait until you see them set up. I've arranged for professional lighting to highlight the key elements." As we formed our two-vehicle convoy, me driving the truck with Thomas beside me, followed by Derek, Jessica, and Ellie in the SUV, I felt a surge of unexpected emotion. This journey wasn't just about a vehicle being recognized. It was about my life's work being validated in a way I'd never sought, but now found myself appreciating. The exhibition hall was already bustling with activity when we arrived. Car transporters lined the loading area, disgorging pristine classics worth millions. Teams of detailers fussed over vehicles already positioned on the show floor, polishing surfaces that already gleamed. Kat Reynolds met us at the entrance, her face lighting up at the sight of the F-100 rumbling into the loading zone. "Maggie, right on time." She guided me to a prime spot near the center of the hall, directly under a skylight. "This is perfect. The natural light will highlight that authentic patina beautifully." For the next few hours, we worked as a team to set up the display. Derek directed the placement of his professionally printed boards, arranging them to create a narrative flow around the truck. Jessica and Ellie arranged the glass cases containing original documentation and select memorabilia from my years with the vehicle. Thomas stood back, occasionally offering suggestions, but mostly watching with quiet pride. By early afternoon, everything was ready. Our display stood in stark contrast to many of the others surrounding us. While most featured over-restored vehicles gleaming with excessive polish, ours presented an honest working truck with a real history, surrounded by the story of a woman who had defied expectations in a male-dominated field. "It looks perfect," Kat declared, standing back to assess the finished display. Exactly what this exhibition needed. Authenticity in a sea of over-restoration. As exhibitors completed their setups, many began to drift over to our display, drawn by the unusual sight of a truck that showed its age proudly. I found myself answering questions about mechanical specifications, restoration choices, and my experience as a female mechanic. Derek hovered nearby, occasionally interjecting with surprising knowledge about the truck's features, knowledge he'd clearly been studying up on. His enthusiasm wasn't feigned. He genuinely seemed proud to be associated with the display, with the truck, and most surprisingly with me. "Your son-in-law knows his stuff," one elderly collector commented after Derek had explained the rarity of the special equipment package. "He's learning," I replied with a smile, catching Derek's pleased expression at the indirect compliment. As the afternoon wore on, more vehicles arrived, and the hall grew crowded with exhibitors. Thomas suggested we take a break for a late lunch, and we headed to a small cafe across from the exhibition center. "I think we're going to get a lot of attention tomorrow," Jessica said as we settled into a booth. "Mom's truck is different from everything else I've seen so far." "That's the point," Kat had explained during one of our planning calls. "This exhibition is about challenging the male-dominated collector narrative. Your truck, maintained by a woman, driven daily rather than stored in a garage, represents everything we're trying to highlight." Derek, who had been checking messages on his phone, suddenly looked up with an odd expression. "Maggie, how many people have you told about the truck being in the show?" I frowned, trying to remember. "Just family, really. And Ellie, of course." "Why?" He turned his phone around to show a local news website's homepage. There, featured prominently, was a headline: "Local woman's junk truck revealed as rare collector's item worth small fortune." My stomach dropped as I read further. The article, citing sources close to the family, claimed the truck had been discovered to be worth upwards of $150,000 and included quotes about how it had been dismissed as worthless junk before its true value was revealed. I looked up sharply. Where did this come from? Derek appeared genuinely confused. "I have no idea. I certainly didn't talk to any reporters." Jessica read through the article, her expression darkening. "This makes it sound like Mom just stumbled onto this valuable truck by accident, not that she's spent decades maintaining it, and the value is completely exaggerated." Thomas put a calming hand on my arm. "Someone's trying to create a more sensational story than the real one." "But who?" Ellie wondered. "Who else even knew about the show?" A cold suspicion formed in my mind. "Derek, did you mention the truck to anyone at work? Or to your father?" Derek's face paled slightly. Might have mentioned it to my dad. I was excited about the project, the display materials. He asked what I was working on, and he turned it into this. I gestured at the phone, feeling a familiar disappointment settling in my chest. The real story of preservation, of a woman's expertise, of valuing history, had been twisted into a sensationalized rags-to-riches narrative that completely missed the point. "I'm sorry," Derek said, looking genuinely distressed. "I had no idea he'd do something like this." I took a deep breath, pushing down my anger. "It's not your fault, but now we need to deal with it." "I'll call my father right now," Derek said firmly, standing up. "This is completely unacceptable." He stepped outside to make the call. Thomas squeezed my hand. "This doesn't change anything about tomorrow, Mags. The people who matter will understand the real story." I nodded, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something precious had been tarnished. Not the truck. Nothing could diminish what it meant to me, but the quiet dignity of sharing my story on my own terms. Derek returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. He admitted it, said he was helping generate interest in the family's asset. His jaw tightened. I told him it wasn't his story to tell, and certainly not to distort. He didn't seem to understand why I was upset. "Did he plant the story?" Jessica asked. Derek nodded. "Called in a favor with someone at the Herald. I've demanded a retraction, but the damage is done." I looked at my son-in-law with new eyes, seeing real anger on my behalf, something I hadn't expected. "Thank you for trying," I said sincerely. "I'm so sorry, Maggie," he replied, genuine remorse in his voice. My father has always seen everything in terms of monetary value and publicity opportunities. I never should have mentioned the truck to him. Kat Reynolds appeared at our table, her expression concerned. "I just saw the article," she said without preamble. "This could complicate things tomorrow." I sighed, pushing my barely touched lunch aside. "How bad will it be?" Kat settled into the empty chair Derek offered her. "The good news is that most serious collectors won't care about sensationalist headlines. The bad news is that we might get curious onlookers hoping to see a hidden treasure, or people looking to argue about the truck's actual value. The whole point of the exhibition was to focus on the stories, not the price tags," I said, frustration evident in my voice. "And that's still the point," Kat assured me, "but we might need to adapt." She thought for a moment, tapping her long fingers on the table. "Actually, this could be an opportunity." "How so?" Thomas asked. "The article has created interest, albeit for the wrong reasons. We can use that attention to redirect the narrative." She turned to Derek. "Those display materials you created, they tell the real story, yes? About Maggie's expertise, her years maintaining the truck?" Derek nodded. "Absolutely. That's the central focus." "Good. We'll make sure that's what people see first." She turned back to me. "And Maggie, I'd like to move your interview to the main stage tomorrow morning. Instead of a private recording for the catalog, let's make it public. Let people hear directly from you what this truck really represents." I felt my stomach tighten. "A public interview? I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that." Thomas placed his hand over mine. "You've been teaching younger mechanics for years, Mags. This is just another form of education." Ellie nudged my shoulder. "If anyone can set the record straight, it's you. Remember how you used to shut down those arrogant customers who thought they knew more about their cars than you did?" A reluctant smile tugged at my lips. "Those were private conversations, not a stage presentation." "Just think of it as talking about something you love," Jessica suggested. "You never have trouble doing that." I looked around at their supportive faces and felt my resistance wavering. "Fine," I conceded, "but I'm not discussing dollar values or playing into this hidden treasure narrative." Kat nodded approvingly. "Perfect. Authenticity is exactly what we need." She stood checking her watch. I need to make some adjustments to tomorrow's program. See you all in the morning, 9 sharp for setup. After she left, we finished our lunch in subdued conversation. Derek remained uncharacteristically quiet, his earlier enthusiasm dimmed by his father's interference. "I've been thinking," he said suddenly as we were preparing to leave. "Would it be all right if I stayed at the exhibition hall this afternoon? There are some adjustments I'd like to make to our display in light of recent developments." I glanced at Jessica, who looked as surprised as I felt by Derek's continued dedication to the project. "Of course," I agreed. "What did you have in mind?" "Just some additional context," he said vaguely. "I'll explain tomorrow. You should all go home and rest, especially you, Maggie. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." We parted ways outside the cafe, Derek heading back to the exhibition hall while the rest of us returned to our respective homes. I spent the evening in uncharacteristic nervousness, rehearsing what I might say in the interview, while Thomas patiently listened to my practice answers. "Just be yourself," he advised as we got ready for bed. "That's who they want to hear from, the real Maggie Wilson, not some polished presenter." The real Maggie Wilson has engine grease permanently embedded in her fingerprints and uses technical jargon that puts most people to sleep, I replied dryly. Thomas smiled, pulling me close. The real Maggie Wilson is passionate, knowledgeable, and doesn't suffer fools gladly. Those are exactly the qualities needed to set this story straight. I rested my head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his unwavering confidence in me. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," he replied, echoing his words. "From the previous night. It comes from listening to my wife." Morning arrived with a flurry of text messages, Jessica confirming they were on their way to pick us up, Ellie reporting she was already at the venue helping with last-minute arrangements, and most surprisingly, a message from Derek. "Display updates complete. Think you'll approve." When we arrived at the exhibition hall, the change was immediately apparent. Derek had rearranged the entire display overnight, shifting the focus dramatically. The monetary value mentioned in the newspaper article was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he'd created a new central panel titled "The Value of Preservation: One Woman's 35-Year Journey with a '56 Ford." The timeline now emphasized my career milestones. Alongside the truck's history, my engineering degree, opening my own shop, mentoring young mechanics, all illustrated with photos Jessica must have provided from our family albums. He'd added quotes from my former employees and customers about my expertise and integrity. Most touchingly, he'd created a special section about how the truck had been part of our family's life. Holidays, road trips, even Jessica's wedding day, when we decorated it with flowers to drive her to the church. I stood speechless, taking in the transformation. The display no longer presented just a valuable classic truck. It told the story of a life dedicated to preservation and expertise. My life. "What do you think?" Derek asked, approaching nervously. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd worked through much of the night. "It's perfect," I managed, genuinely moved. "You did all this overnight?" He nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I couldn't let my father's version of the story stand. This," he gestured at the display, "this is the real story. Your story." Jessica slipped her arm around his waist, looking at him with newfound respect. "It's amazing, honey." Thomas clapped Derek on the shoulder. "Well done, son." The word hung in the air between them. Son. Carrying. A weight of acceptance neither man acknowledged directly but both clearly felt. Kat appeared, clipboard in hand, looking impressed with the display changes. "This is exactly what we needed," she approved. "Maggie, we're scheduled for the interview at 11. That gives us 2 hours to prepare and greet the first wave of visitors." The exhibition opened to the public at 10, and almost immediately our display drew attention. Some visitors were clearly drawn by the newspaper article, approaching with that specific look of people hoping to see a hidden treasure. But Derek's redesigned presentation quickly redirected their interest, guiding them from monetary value to something more meaningful. I found myself engaged in conversation after conversation, explaining mechanical details to interested collectors, sharing stories about my years as a female mechanic with wide-eyed young women, and occasionally, firmly correcting misconceptions about the truck's discovery perpetuated by the newspaper article. "I didn't discover anything," I told one persistent journalist. "I've known what this truck was from the day I bought it. Its value to me has always been in its mechanical integrity and the role it's played in my family's life, not in what someone might pay for it at auction." As 11 o'clock approached, Kat guided me toward the small stage set up at the center of the hall. My nervousness returned in full force as I saw the rows of chairs arranged for the audience, many already filled with expectant faces. "Just be yourself," Kat advised, echoing Thomas's words. "That's who they've come to hear." The interviewer was a younger woman named Vanessa, an automotive journalist with a reputation for thoughtful, in-depth pieces rather than sensationalism. She greeted me warmly, immediately putting me at ease. "I'm so glad you agreed to this," she said as we took our seats on stage. "That newspaper article completely missed the point." "Most sensationalist pieces do," I replied, relaxing slightly, at her understanding. The audience grew as Vanessa introduced me, filling nearly every seat. I spotted Thomas, Jessica, and Ellie in the front row, their encouraging faces centering me. Derek stood at the back, still by our display, directing people toward the stage. "So, Maggie," Vanessa began once the audience had settled, "let's start at the beginning. How did you first come to own this remarkable Ford F-100? I told the story of the estate sale, of seeing the truck behind the barn and knowing immediately it was something special. As I spoke, the nervousness faded, replaced by the natural enthusiasm I felt whenever I discussed vehicles I cared about. "Many people would have seen an old, non-functioning truck and walked away," Vanessa observed. "What made you different?" I considered the question. "I've always been able to see the potential in things others dismiss," I explained. Growing up as a girl interested in mechanics, I faced plenty of dismissal myself. Maybe that gave me a different perspective on what's valuable and what's not. The interview flowed naturally from there. My mechanical background, the challenges of the restoration, my philosophy of preservation rather than over-restoration. "You've maintained this truck to drive, not just to show," Vanessa noted. "Why? Is that important to you?" "Vehicles are meant to be used," I replied firmly. "A truck that just sits in a garage, no matter how valuable, isn't fulfilling its purpose. Every mile I've driven has added to this truck's story, not diminished its worth." Vanessa nodded appreciatively. "Let's address the elephant in the room. That newspaper article claiming your truck was discovered to be valuable after years of being considered junk. How do you respond to that characterization?" I straightened in my chair. "That article got it completely backward," I said firmly. "This truck was never junk to me, and its value was never a surprise. I knew exactly what I had from the beginning, a well-designed, solidly built vehicle worth preserving." "So the monetary value doesn't matter to you?" she pressed. Of course it matters," I acknowledged. "I'm practical enough to appreciate that my years of careful maintenance have preserved something of financial value. But that was never the goal. The goal was preservation for its own sake, keeping something well-built running the way it was meant to." As the interview continued, I caught sight of unfamiliar faces at the back of the audience. Richard and Elaine Harrington, Derek's parents, had arrived. Richard looked uncomfortable, adjusting his collar repeatedly, while Elaine surveyed the crowd with a calculating eye. I refocused on Vanessa's questions, discussing how the truck had been present for every significant family milestone, from bringing Jessica home from the hospital as a newborn to helping friends move to carrying supplies for community projects. "It sounds like this vehicle is really an extension of your family," Vanessa observed. "That's exactly right," I agreed. "In many ways, it's the most tangible representation of our family values: resilience, practicality, the importance of maintenance, rather than replacement." As the interview concluded to warm applause, I felt a profound sense of relief. The real story had been told, not the sensationalized version that reduced decades of expertise to a lucky financial windfall. Thomas enveloped me in a hug as I stepped off the stage. "You were magnificent," he whispered in my ear. "Just spoke the truth," I replied, though I couldn't help feeling pleased by his praise. Jessica hugged me next. "Mom, you're going to be the star of this entire show." "Hardly," I demurred. "There are vehicles worth 10 times mine here." "Worth more money, maybe," Ellie interjected. "Not worth more story." We made our way back to our display, where a small crowd had gathered to see the truck in person after hearing the interview. Derek was fielding questions expertly, I noticed, with surprise, demonstrating a knowledge of the vehicle's specifications that went beyond what he could have gleaned from my brief tutorials. "He stayed up all night researching," Jessica informed me, following my gaze. "Said if he was going to represent your truck, he needed to get the details right." I raised my eyebrows, impressed despite myself. Before I could respond, another voice cut through the crowd. "So this is the famous truck we've been hearing about." Richard Harrington approached, Elaine at his side. He examined the F-100 with a critical eye, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington," I greeted them neutrally. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "Derek insisted," Elaine I explained, her tone suggesting this wasn't a request they'd been pleased to accommodate. "Said we needed to see the real story for ourselves." Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. "That was quite an interview," he said, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. "Very educational." "Thank you," I replied, unsure of his intent. Derek joined us, standing protectively close to me. "Dad, I think you owe Maggie an apology for that newspaper article." Richard's face flushed. "I was simply trying to generate interest." "In something that wasn't yours to promote," Derek interrupted firmly. "The truck belongs to Maggie. The story belongs to Maggie. You had no right to distort it for the sake of sensationalism." I watched with astonishment as Derek stood his ground against his father, something I'd never witnessed before. Richard appeared equally surprised, opening and closing his mouth several times before finally managing a response. "Perhaps I was overzealous," he conceded reluctantly. "The article did take certain liberties with the facts. It completely misrepresented the significance of this vehicle and Maggie's expertise," Derek pressed, unwilling to accept the half-apology. Richard's jaw tightened, but Elaine placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Richard," she said quietly, "Derek's right. We should have consulted the family first." The acknowledgement that we were family too, not just Jessica, but Thomas and I as well, wasn't lost on me. It was a small concession, but significant coming from Elaine, who had always maintained a polite distance. Richard looked at me, directly, his businessman's pride visibly at war with the recognition that he'd overstepped. "I apologize for any inconvenience or distress the article caused," he said finally. "It was well-intentioned, but poorly executed." It wasn't a full admission of wrongdoing, but it was clearly as much as a man of Richard's temperament could manage. I decided to accept it with grace. "Thank you," I said simply. "I appreciate you coming today to see the exhibition for yourselves." An awkward silence fell, broken when a middle-aged man in an expensive suit approached our group, his attention fixed on the truck. "Excuse me," he said, extending his hand to me. "James Whitman, Whitman Restorations." I couldn't help overhearing, Your interview earlier. Your approach to preservation over restoration is exactly the philosophy we try to promote at our shop. I shook his hand, recognizing the name of one of the most respected restoration businesses on the East Coast. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Whitman. I've admired your work for years. He beamed. The admiration is mutual, Ms. Wilson. Your maintenance of this F-100 is exemplary. He gestured to the truck. The mechanical integrity combined with honest patina. It's exactly what we try to teach our apprentices. Apprentices? I echoed, intrigued. We run a training program, he explained, teaching traditional automotive skills to a new generation. Unfortunately, we've been struggling to find instructors who understand the importance of preservation rather than just cosmetic restoration. I nodded my understanding. It's becoming a lost art. Exactly, Whitman agreed enthusiastically, which is why I'd like to speak with you about possibly conducting some master classes at our facility. Your expertise would be invaluable to our students. I blinked in surprise. You want me to teach? If you're interested, he confirmed. After seeing your truck and hearing your philosophy, I can't think of anyone better qualified. Before I could respond, Richard Harrington unexpectedly interjected himself into the conversation. Maggie would be an excellent instructor, he stated with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. Her technical knowledge is unparalleled. I stared at him in shock. Had Richard Harrington just complimented me? Whitman turned to Richard with interest. You're familiar with Ms. Wilson's work? She's my daughter-in-law's mother, Richard replied, placing a proprietary hand on my shoulder that I was too stunned to shrug off. Our family has always valued her expertise. The blatant revisionism of this statement, from a man who had dismissed my truck as junk just weeks earlier, left me momentarily speechless. Thomas caught my eye from across the group, his expression a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Whitman seemed impressed. Well then, I hope you'll consider my offer, Ms. Wilson. We'd be honored to have you share your knowledge with our apprentices. I'll certainly think about it, I managed, still processing the rapid shift in dynamics. As Whitman handed me his business card and moved on to examine the truck more closely, Richard maintained his position beside me, now apparently determined to play the role of supportive in-law. Teaching opportunities at Whitman's are highly sought after, he informed me in a low voice. Very prestigious in collector circles. I'm aware of that, I replied, finding my voice again. Though I'm surprised you are. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. I may have done some research since Derek first mentioned your truck. Whitman's reputation is well known even outside automotive circles. Elaine drifted closer, her curiosity evidently piqued by the unexpected turn of events. What's this about teaching? Derek quickly filled in his mother, his expression caught between amazement at my opportunity and amusement at his father's sudden about-face. How interesting, Elaine commented, her tone suggesting she was recalibrating her assessment of me. Will you accept the offer, Maggie? I haven't decided, I said honestly. I've never considered formal teaching. But you've been teaching Jessica about cars her entire life, Thomas pointed out, joining our circle. And you mentored dozens of young mechanics at the shop. That was different, I protested. That was practical, hands-on guidance, not structured classes. Which is exactly what makes you qualified, Derek surprised me by saying. Those apprentices need someone who has real-world experience, not just theoretical knowledge. I looked at him with newfound appreciation. Thank you for that vote of confidence. Jessica slipped her arm through mine. Mom, this could be amazing. All those years of knowledge you have, it shouldn't just end with retirement. I felt a strange mixture of emotions, pride that my expertise was being recognized, apprehension about stepping into a formal teaching role, and lingering bewilderment at the Harringtons' sudden interest in my career. I'll think about it, I repeated more firmly this time. The conversation shifted as more visitors approached our display, drawn by the growing crowd and the buzz generated by my interview. For the rest of the afternoon, I found myself at the center of a steady stream of enthusiasts, collectors, and even a few young women interested in automotive careers. Through it all, Derek remained by my side, helping field questions and directing people to different aspects of the display. His knowledge had clearly expanded beyond the superficial research of a few weeks ago. He now spoke with genuine understanding about the truck's mechanical features and historical significance. "You've been studying," I observed during a rare quiet moment. He looked slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to understand what made this truck so special to you, beyond its monetary value, I mean." "And do you understand?" He considered the question. "Seriously, I'm starting to. It's not just about having a valuable possession. It's about the relationship you've built with it over time, the dedication to maintaining something properly, the connection to history." He paused. "It's made me think about what I value and why." I nodded, sensing a genuine shift in his perspective. That's a valuable insight for anyone to have. As the day wore on, the Harringtons gradually integrated themselves into our group, Richard taking every opportunity to introduce me to various business associates as my son's mother-in-law, the mechanical expert. Elaine, meanwhile, engaged Thomas in surprisingly earnest conversation about his volunteer work with the community workshop. By late afternoon, Kat Reynolds found me again, her expression triumphant. "Your truck is the talk of the show," she informed me. "The judges have been by 3 times already." "Judges?" I echoed. I didn't realize we were being judged. I thought this was just an exhibition. "Every vehicle in the show is eligible for category awards," she explained. "And yours is definitely making an impression in the preservation class." "I never entered it for competition," I protested. Kat smiled enigmatically. "Every vehicle on the floor is automatically considered. The judges make their decisions tomorrow." Before I could question her further, another visitor approached with questions about the truck's original specifications, and the moment passed. As the exhibition hall prepared to close for the day, our family group gathered one last time around the display. The truck sat under the gentle spotlights Derek had arranged, its honest patina and mechanical perfection a statement among the over-restored vehicles surrounding it. "Quite a day," Thomas observed, slipping his arm around my waist. "Quite a transformation," I replied quietly, glancing at Derek and his parents, who were engaged in animated conversation with Jessica about dinner plans. "People can surprise you," Thomas murmured. "Sometimes they just need their perspective shifted." I leaned against him, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day catching up with me. I still can't believe Richard Harrington is now boasting about my unparalleled expertise to his country club friends. Thomas chuckled. "Amazing what a little external validation can do. Once Whitman showed interest in your knowledge, suddenly Richard could see its value too." "That's rather cynical," I observed. "But not inaccurate," he countered with a smile. Jessica approached us, followed by Derek and his parents. "We were thinking of dinner at Marcello's," she suggested, "to celebrate Mom's successful interview." "All 6 of us?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Family dinner," Derek confirmed, with only the slightest hesitation before the word family. I exchanged a glance with Thomas, who gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. "Marcello's sounds lovely," I agreed. As we walked toward the exit, Derek fell into step beside me. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me be part of this." He gestured back toward the display. "For giving me a chance to understand something important to you. I know I didn't deserve it after the way I dismissed your truck initially." I studied his face, seeing genuine regret in his expression. "Everyone deserves a second chance to see things differently," I said finally. "Even son-in-laws who initially act like pretentious jerks." He laughed, accepting the gentle jab with good humor. Well, this pretentious jerk has learned his lesson. Never judge something's value by its appearance or age. That's a good lesson for anyone to learn, I agreed. Especially someone about to become a father. Derek stopped walking abruptly, his eyes widening. What? How did you— Jessica. Hasn't said anything, I assured him. But a mother notices these things. The way she's avoided wine, the subtle changes in her appearance. I smiled at his dumbfounded expression. She's waiting to tell us until she's ready. I'm just giving you a preview of another lesson you'll soon learn. What's that? He asked, still processing the fact that I'd guessed their secret. That the most valuable things in life rarely come with price tags, I replied, continuing toward the exit where the others waited. Sometimes they arrive in packages that don't look impressive at first glance, but turn out to be more precious than anything money could buy. Derek caught up with me, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. Like a faded blue truck that turns out to be a family treasure? I smiled, pleased by his insight. Exactly like that. Dinner at Marcello's unfolded with an ease I wouldn't have believed possible just a month earlier. The upscale Italian restaurant was a favorite of the Harringtons, evident by the way the maitre d' greeted Richard and Elaine by name, leading us to what was clearly their preferred table by the window. Maggie, you must try the osso buco, Richard advised as we settled in. Marcello imports the veal directly from a specific farm in Tuscany. I'm more of a pasta person myself, I replied, scanning the elaborate menu with its lack of prices. Never a good sign for the budget-conscious. Thomas squeezed my knee under the table, a silent reassurance that this unexpected social evolution was equally surreal to him. Across the table, Jessica was practically glowing with happiness at seeing both sides of her family engaged in civil conversation. So, Maggie, Elaine began as our wine was poured, sparkling water for Jessica, confirming my suspicions. Derek tells us you maintained your own garage all these years. Did you find it difficult balancing that with raising Jessica? The question seemed genuinely curious rather than judgmental, another surprise in an evening full of them. It had its challenges, I acknowledged. But Thomas was an equal partner. In parenting, and having my own business actually gave me more flexibility than a traditional job might have. And Jessica spent plenty of time at the shop, Thomas added. She could change oil before she could ride a bike. Jessica laughed, which horrified my middle school friends and made me the coolest kid in auto shop class in high school. You took auto shop? Elaine asked, seeming genuinely surprised. Required all my students to know basic maintenance, I explained. Boys and girls alike. Practical skills, Richard commented approvingly. Something sorely lacking in today's education system. The conversation flowed surprisingly well through appetizers and main courses. Richard, once he'd moved past his initial discomfort, proved knowledgeable about classic cars, revealing a depth I hadn't expected. Apparently, his father had owned a restoration shop in Connecticut before the family fortune was made in real estate development. I spent summers working there as a teenager, he explained, warming to the subject. Mostly sweeping floors and fetching tools, but I learned to appreciate craftsmanship. Why didn't you continue with it? Thomas asked. Richard's expression shifted subtly. My father wanted me to pursue something more prestigious. In those days, working with your hands wasn't considered suitable for someone with my educational opportunities. That explains Derek's attitude, I observed without thinking. Instead of taking offense, Richard nodded thoughtfully. I suppose it does. We raise our children with the values we've been taught, sometimes without questioning them. Derek, who had been relatively quiet, looked at his father with new understanding. You never mentioned Grandpa's shop before. It wasn't something we talked about, Richard admitted. Your grandfather was disappointed when I chose business school over continuing the family trade. The revelation cast Richard in a new light, not just as the status-conscious businessman, but as someone who had also strayed from family expectations, albeit in the opposite direction from what I'd encouraged with Jessica. "Perhaps that's why your truck struck such a chord with me," Richard continued, surprising me further. "It reminded me of vehicles my father used to restore, the ones he truly cared about, not just the ones that brought the highest prices." "Well, you're welcome to visit it any time," I offered impulsively. "It's not going anywhere." "Even with offers likely coming after today's exhibition?" Richard inquired, his business instincts evidently not completely suppressed. "The truck isn't for sale," I stated firmly. "No matter what offers come in." Richard looked ready to argue the financial wisdom of this decision, but Elaine placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not everything valuable is for selling, dear," she reminded him quietly. By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere had, shifted from the polite civility of strangers to something approaching genuine family warmth. Jessica was practically vibrating with happiness beside Derek, who kept shooting her meaningful glances that clearly said, "Should we tell them now?" I pretended not to notice, wanting to give them their moment when they were ready. That moment came as espresso was served, Jessica clearing her throat nervously. "We actually have some news," she announced, gripping Derek's hand on the table. "We wanted to wait a bit longer, but since we're all here together..." She looked at Derek, who nodded encouragingly. "We're expecting a baby," she finished, her smile radiant. "Due in November." The table erupted in congratulations, Elaine immediately tearing up while Richard beamed with grandfatherly pride. Thomas squeezed my hand under the table, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "How far along?" Elaine asked eagerly. "Just over 12 weeks, Jessica replied. "We had the first ultrasound last week." I hugged my daughter tightly, whispering, "I knew it," in her ear, which made her laugh. "Of course you did, Mom. You notice everything." As the excitement settled, Derek raised his water glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he proposed, "and to family traditions worth preserving." His eyes met mine meaningfully as we clinked glasses, a silent acknowledgement of how much had changed between us. The truck that had once been a source of division had somehow become a bridge, connecting our different worlds in unexpected ways. The second day of the exhibition dawned bright and clear. The hall would be open to the public from 9 to 6, with the awards ceremony scheduled for 5 o'clock. After yesterday's excitement, I felt oddly calm as we prepared to return for the final day. "Not nervous about the judging?" Thomas asked as we drove to the exhibition center. I shook my head. The truck was never entered to win awards. Besides, the preservation class usually goes to vehicles that have been meticulously maintained in original condition from new. Mine's been actively driven and shows it. "Don't sell yourself short," he advised. "You've maintained it better than most museum pieces." When we arrived, the hall was already bustling with activity. Judges in navy blazers moved methodically between displays, clipboards in hand, examining vehicles with meticulous attention to detail. Our display had drawn a small crowd, several visitors examining the timeline Derek had created of my history with the truck. Derek himself was already there, making minor adjustments to the lighting. He greeted us with obvious excitement. "The judges were just here," he reported. "They spent a long time looking at the engine and the documentation. One of them said it was the most comprehensive maintenance record he'd ever seen for a vehicle this age." "That's just good practice," I said, though I couldn't help feeling pleased by the validation. "They were particularly impressed by your use of period-correct parts, even for routine maintenance," Derek continued. "Apparently, most preserved vehicles use modern replacements for things like filters and belts. Modern parts aren't calibrated for these older engines," I explained. "They might fit, but they don't perform the same. It takes more effort to source the right components, but the truck runs better for it." "That's exactly what the head judge said you'd say," Derek grinned. "He seemed to know your philosophy already." Before I could respond, a distinguished older gentleman approached our display. He walked with the confidence of someone who had spent his life around fine automobiles, his weathered hands suggesting he'd worked on them himself rather than merely admiring them. "Ms. Wilson," he greeted me, extending his hand. "Edward Blackwell, head judge for the preservation class. I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to ask you a few more questions about your maintenance approach." "Not at all," I replied, shaking his hand. "Your documentation indicates you've driven this truck nearly every day for 35 years, he began, consulting his clipboard. "Most vehicles in the preservation class are driven very sparingly. How have you maintained originality with such regular use?" I explained my philosophy in detail, how regular driving actually kept systems functioning properly, how I'd sourced new old stock parts whenever possible, and fabricated replacements when necessary to exact original specifications. "And the engine has never been rebuilt?" he asked, sounding slightly skeptical. "Rebuilt, no. Maintained, absolutely," I clarified. "Regular oil changes with the correct weight oil, proper valve adjustments, careful tuning. These engines were built to last if properly cared for." Blackwell nodded, making notes. "Your approach challenges the conventional wisdom in preservation circles that minimal use is best for maintaining originality." "With respect," I replied, "vehicles were built to be used. Systems deteriorate faster from disuse than from proper use. Rubber dries out, fluids break down, seals shrink. A truck driven regularly with proper maintenance will outlast a garage queen every time." A smile cracked his serious demeanor. "That's been my personal experience as well, though it's considered heresy among some collectors." He made a final note on his clipboard. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Wilson. Your truck is a remarkable testament to the value of true preservation, maintaining not just appearance, but function." As he moved on to the next display, Derek looked at me with newfound respect. "You just schooled one of the most respected judges in the country on preservation techniques." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just told him what I know from experience." "That's what makes it valuable," Derek insisted. "It's not theoretical knowledge from a book. It's hands-on wisdom from decades of practice." Throughout the day, various experts and enthusiasts stopped by our display. James Whitman returned with several of his apprentices in tow, eager for me to explain specific maintenance techniques. I found myself conducting impromptu mini-lessons on proper carburetor tuning and the importance of correct ignition timing. "You see?" Thomas murmured during a brief lull. "You're already teaching." I had to admit, there was something deeply satisfying about sharing knowledge with younger mechanics who genuinely wanted to learn. Their questions were thoughtful, their interest sincere. By mid-afternoon, I had tentatively agreed to visit Whitman's shop to discuss the possibility of occasionally teaching master classes. Jessica and Derek returned from lunch bringing coffee for everyone, including Richard and Elaine, who had arrived shortly after noon. The Harringtons had integrated themselves seamlessly into our group, Richard holding court with several business associates he'd invited to see the truck. Elaine engaged in animated conversation with Ellie about the challenges of women in male-dominated fields. "It's like we've entered an alternate dimension," Thomas whispered to me as we observed the unexpected social harmony. "I keep waiting for the simulation to glitch," I agreed with a smile. As the afternoon progressed, a nervous energy began to build throughout the hall. The judges had completed their rounds, and groups huddled near their displays, speculating about the upcoming awards. I maintained that I had no expectations, but even I felt a flutter of anticipation as 5 o'clock approached. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the sound system at precisely 5. "Please make your way to the central stage for the awards ceremony." We gathered our group, now expanded to include Ellie, the Harringtons, and even James Whitman, who had returned, for the ceremony, and found spaces near the stage. Kat Reynolds caught my eye from the judges' area, giving me an enigmatic smile that did nothing to calm my unexpectedly jangled nerves. The ceremony began with minor categories: best interior, best engine bay, most authentic restoration. I half listened, as various owners were called to the stage to receive their trophies, genuinely happy for their recognition, but still convinced our honest, driven truck wouldn't qualify for such rarefied accolades. And now, the announcer continued, we come to the preservation class. This category recognizes vehicles that have been maintained in authentic, original condition, while still serving their intended purpose as functional automobiles. I felt Thomas's hand find mine as the announcer continued. The judges noted that this year's winner challenged conventional preservation wisdom by demonstrating that regular use, when coupled with meticulous maintenance, can result in a vehicle that remains truer to its original character than those preserved through minimal use. My heart began to pound as I recognized my own philosophy being described. The winner of the preservation class, with a unanimous decision from our judge panel, is the 1956 Ford F-100, owned and maintained by Margaret Wilson of Millbrook. The applause seemed distant as Jessica pushed me gently toward the stage. I moved in a daze, barely registering the congratulatory pats on my back as I made my way forward. On stage, Edward Blackwell handed me a substantial crystal trophy with a warm smile. A well-deserved recognition, he said, shaking my hand. Your truck embodies what we should all strive for: preservation of function as well as form. I managed to thank him, still processing the unexpected honor, before turning to face the audience. From the stage, I could see our entire group: Thomas, beaming with pride, Jessica wiping away tears, Ellie giving me an enthusiastic thumbs up, and most surprisingly, Derek recording the moment on his phone, his expression one of genuine joy for my achievement. The microphone was in front of me, clearly awaiting some remarks. I hadn't prepared anything, never expecting to be in this position. Taking a deep breath, I spoke from the heart. This recognition means more than I can express, not because it validates the truck's value, but because it acknowledges a philosophy I've lived by my entire career, that things of quality deserve to be maintained, used, and cherished. This truck has been part of my family's life for 35 years. It's carried groceries and grandparents, wedding decorations, and workshop supplies. It's never been a showpiece. It's been a working vehicle, as it was meant to be. I paused, gathering my thoughts. In a world that increasingly values the new over the proven, that replaces rather than repairs, there's profound satisfaction in maintaining something built to last. That's the true value of preservation. Not just keeping things as they were, but keeping them working as they should. The applause that followed felt genuinely warm, and as I returned to our group with the trophy, I was enveloped in a group hug that somehow included not just Thomas and Jessica, but Derek, Ellie, and even the Harringtons. I knew it, Kat Reynolds said, approaching us after the ceremony concluded. From the moment I saw your truck, I knew it would challenge the conventional wisdom in the preservation category. It was never about winning, I insisted, still slightly overwhelmed by the recognition. Which is precisely why you deserved to win, she replied with a knowing smile. The best preservationists care about the vehicle, not the accolades. As the exhibition hall began to empty, our group lingered by the truck, none of us quite ready to end this unexpected moment of triumph. Derek had placed the trophy prominently in our display, where it caught the light from the overhead spots. We should celebrate, Richard announced decisively. Dinner at the Gable Room, my treat. The Gable Room was Millbrook's most exclusive restaurant, the kind of place where reservations were typically booked months in advance. They'll be fully booked on a Saturday night, I pointed out practically. Richard smiled the confident smile of a man accustomed to doors opening at the mention of his name. Leave that to me. Sure enough, a phone call secured us a table for 8 at 7 o'clock. As we prepared to leave, I found myself standing alone with the truck for a moment, still processing the events of the day. Just you and me again, I murmured, running my hand along its fender. Who would have thought you'd be the belle of the ball? Talking to vehicles is the first sign of true connection, James Whitman commented, approaching with a smile. The second is answering for them in your head. I laughed, caught in the act. Guilty on both counts. I wanted to congratulate. You again before you left, he said. That trophy is well deserved. And to confirm, you'll visit the shop next Thursday to discuss the master classes? I'll be there, I agreed, though I'm still not convinced I'm qualified to teach formally. After watching you with my apprentices today, I have no such doubts, he assured me. Teaching isn't about formal qualifications, it's about having knowledge worth sharing and the ability to communicate it clearly. You have both in abundance. His confidence was flattering, and I found myself looking forward to this unexpected new chapter. As Whitman departed with a final congratulation, Derek approached, hands in his pockets, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. I wanted a moment to talk privately, he began, to apologize properly for how dismissive I was about your truck. Water under the bridge, I assured him. People's perspectives change. Mine certainly has, he acknowledged. But it's more than that. I've been thinking about what I want to teach my child, our child, about values, about what matters. He glanced at Jessica, who was engaged in conversation with Ellie and Elaine across the hall. I grew up believing success meant accumulating the newest, the most expensive, the most impressive. But there's something hollow about that perspective. There is, I agreed quietly. When you talked about maintaining something of quality, about the satisfaction of keeping something working as it should, that resonated with me in a way I wasn't expecting. He smiled ruefully. It made me realize I don't actually know how to maintain anything. I just replace things when they're no longer new enough. The admission seemed to cost him something in pride, but his expression was determined. I'd like to learn, he continued. Not just about cars specifically, but about the philosophy behind preservation, behind valuing craftsmanship and longevity. I studied him thoughtfully, seeing genuine intent behind the request. Thomas runs a community workshop teaching basic repair skills, everything from furniture restoration to small engine maintenance. They're always looking for new participants. I'd like that, Derek said, nodding. Maybe it could be something Thomas and I do together. The suggestion that he wanted to build a relationship with Thomas beyond just tolerating him as Jessica's father touched me unexpectedly. He'd like that too, I replied, certain it was true. And maybe someday, Derek continued, his gaze. Returning to the truck, you could teach me more about what makes this F-100 so special. Not just its collector value, but all the things I missed when I was too busy seeing only its age. I'd be happy to, I said sincerely, though I warn you, once I start talking about this truck, it's hard to get me to stop. He laughed, a genuine sound free from its usual polished restraint. I'm counting on that. Our child should know where they come from, both sides of their heritage. The Harrington ambition, yes, but also the Wilson principles of quality, maintenance, and seeing value where others miss it. The thoughtfulness of his words, the recognition that our different values could be complementary rather than contradictory, suggested a depth to Derek I hadn't previously credited him with. That's a balanced perspective to pass on, I acknowledged. Children need roots and wings, as they say. We were interrupted by Thomas calling that it was time to head to dinner. As our group moved toward the exit, Derek fell into step beside me. One last thing, he said quietly. Thank you for not giving up on me as a lost cause. I know I didn't make the best first impression. I smiled, remembering his dismissive comments about my old heap of a truck. If there's one thing I've learned in 35 years of restoration work, it's that first impressions aren't always accurate. Sometimes what initially appears damaged beyond repair turns out to be worth the effort of restoration. His answering smile suggested he understood the metaphor perfectly. Ahead of us, Jessica turned, her face glowing with happiness at seeing us walking together in easy conversation. In that moment, I felt a circle closing, my daughter's family and mine finding unexpected common ground through something as seemingly simple as an old truck. The Gable Room lived up to its reputation for exclusivity and excellence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths and fine china, while discreet servers anticipated needs before they were expressed. Richard was clearly in his element, ordering champagne, sparkling cider for Jessica, and suggesting menu items with the confidence of a regular patron. To Maggie, he proposed once our glasses were filled, whose expertise has been recognized by those who truly understand quality. And to family connections strengthened through unexpected circumstances. To the truck that brought us together, Derek added, his glass raised. May it continue to serve as a reminder of what matters. As conversation flowed around the table, I found myself observing the unlikely harmony that had developed between our families. Thomas and Richard were discussing the community workshop, with Richard offering to connect Thomas with potential donors for new equipment. Elaine and Ellie had discovered a shared interest in gardening, while Jessica and Derek sat close together, occasionally whispering private comments that made them both smile. "Penny for your thoughts," Thomas murmured, noticing my contemplative mood. "Just marveling at how quickly everything changed," I replied softly. A month ago, I would have bet anything that Richard Harrington would never willingly sit at a table with us, let alone toast my expertise. External validation is powerful, Thomas observed. Once the judges and experts confirmed what I've always known about you, suddenly everyone could see it. Is that cynical or just realistic? I wondered. A bit of both, he admitted. But I prefer to focus on the outcome rather than the catalyst. Look at them. He nodded toward Derek. Deep in conversation with Ellie about the community workshop. They're genuinely engaged, not just going through the motions. True, I conceded, and Derek seems sincere about wanting to learn. People can surprise you, Thomas said, echoing his words from earlier. Sometimes they just need the right motivation to grow. As dessert was served, an elaborate chocolate, creation that looked too artistic to eat. Richard tapped his glass for attention. Elaine and I have been discussing something we'd like to propose, he began, unusually hesitant for a man accustomed to boardroom confidence. In light of the baby news in this weekend's events, we've been thinking about family traditions and legacies. He glanced at Elaine, who nodded encouragingly. We've always hosted an annual summer gathering at our lake house in the Berkshires, he continued. Typically, it's been business associates and their families. Very formal. He cleared his throat. We'd like to extend an invitation to all of you to join us this year. A chance to spend time together as an extended family before the baby arrives. The invitation hung in the air, its significance clear to everyone at the table. This wasn't a perfunctory social obligation. It was a genuine attempt to integrate our families in a meaningful way. Thomas and I exchanged glances, a wordless communication honed by decades of marriage. I saw in his eyes the same cautious optimism. I felt that this unexpected bridge between our worlds might prove more substantial than we'd dared hope. We'd be honored, Thomas replied for both of us. Thank you for including us. Jessica's eyes glistened with happy tears at this tangible evidence of harmony between the two sides of her family. Derek reached over to squeeze her hand, his own expression reflecting satisfaction at this development. Excellent, Richard declared, visibly relieved by our acceptance. We'll plan for the 4th of July weekend, plenty of time to coordinate details. As conversation resumed around the table, I felt a quiet contentment settle over me. The weekend had brought recognition I'd never sought but deeply appreciated, and more importantly, it had created an unexpected path toward family unity that would benefit Jessica, Derek and their coming child. "So," Thomas asked as we drove home later that evening, the trophy secured carefully in the back seat. "What happens now with the truck? Back to daily driving as usual?" I considered the question, watching the familiar streets of Millbrook pass by. "Pretty much," I decided. "Though I might take it to Whitman's occasionally for the master classes. Show the apprentices what real preservation looks like in action." Thomas smiled, reaching over to take my hand. From reluctant exhibition participant to master instructor. Quite a journey for someone who just wanted to be left alone with her old heap. "Life takes unexpected turns," I observed, "sometimes in a '56 Ford pickup truck." "Speaking of unexpected," Thomas said, his tone growing more serious, "what do you think about Richard's invitation? Are you comfortable with it?" I thought carefully before answering. "I'm cautiously optimistic. People don't change completely overnight, but they can evolve when given the right motivation. Becoming grandparents and seeing their son genuinely happy is powerful motivation. As was seeing you recognized by people they respect," Thomas added. "That too," I acknowledged, "though I'd like to believe the change goes deeper than just social calculations." "Time will tell," Thomas said philosophically. "But for what it's worth, I think Derek's transformation is genuine. The way he talks about wanting to learn, to understand what we value, that comes from somewhere real." I nodded, remembering Derek's earnest expression as he'd asked to learn more about the truck, about the principles it represented. "I think you're right. And for Jessica and the baby's sake, I'm glad." When we arrived home, Thomas carried the trophy inside while I lingered in the driveway, looking at the truck in the soft glow of our porch light. It sat just as it always had, solid and dependable, showing its age proudly in every panel and seam. The preservation class trophy now sat on our mantel, its crystal facets catching the light, but the true reward wasn't the recognition itself. It was the confirmation of a philosophy I'd lived by, that things of quality, properly maintained, only grew in value over time. That sometimes what appeared worthless to untrained eyes held the greatest value of all. And perhaps most unexpectedly, that the same principle could apply to people and relationships. Derek had revealed depths I hadn't initially seen, just as the truck had contained value others had missed. Both had simply needed someone willing to look past first impressions to discover what lay beneath. I placed my hand on the truck's hood, still warm from its journey home. "Not bad for an old heap," I murmured, smiling at the memory of Derek's original dismissal. "Not bad at all." 3 months after the exhibition, life had settled into a new rhythm. The truck continued its daily duties, now with an award-winning status that occasionally earned double takes from those who recognized it from news coverage of the show. The preservation class trophy remained on our mantel, a reminder of that unexpected weekend that had changed so much. Summer had blossomed. In Millbrook, bringing warm evenings perfect for working in the garage with the doors wide open. On one such evening, I was elbow-deep in the truck's engine compartment, performing routine maintenance, when the sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Looking up, I was surprised to see Derek's BMW pulling into the driveway. He climbed out, dressed in jeans and a casual shirt, a far cry from the polished business attire I'd grown accustomed to seeing him in. Even more surprising was the small toolbox he carried. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he called, approaching the garage. "Just routine maintenance," I replied, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "Everything okay?" Derek nodded, setting down the toolbox. "Jessica's at her book club. I thought maybe, if you wouldn't mind, this might be a good time for that lesson you offered." It took me a moment to realize what he meant. "You actually want to learn about the truck?" "If the offer's still open," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. I smiled, genuinely pleased by his initiative. "Of course it is. Thomas is at his workshop meeting, so it's just me tonight. Perfect timing, actually. I'm doing an oil change and basic tune-up." Derek's face lit up with unexpected enthusiasm. "I've never changed oil in my life," he admitted. "The BMW just tells me when to take it to the dealer." "Well, you're about to get your hands dirty," I warned him. "Hope those jeans aren't expensive." He laughed. "Bought them specifically for this. Jessica helped me pick out garage-appropriate clothes." I felt a rush of affection for my daughter, imagining her delight at helping her husband prepare for this bonding opportunity. For the next 2 hours, I guided Derek through the basics of engine maintenance. He proved a surprisingly apt pupil, attentive, asking intelligent questions, and unafraid to get thoroughly greasy in the process. When he successfully removed and replaced the oil filter on his first try, his expression of triumph was almost comical. "I did it!" he exclaimed as proudly, as if he'd performed brain surgery. "You did," I confirmed, hiding my amusement at his disproportionate joy over such a basic task. "Now let's check the points and adjust the timing." As we worked, I explained the philosophy behind preservation maintenance, how keeping systems in proper adjustment prevented larger problems, how understanding the mechanical relationships within an engine helped diagnose issues before they became serious. "It's like preventative healthcare," Derek observed insightfully, "addressing small issues before they become critical." "Exactly," I agreed, impressed by the analogy. Many people wait until something breaks before addressing it. By then, the damage has often spread to other systems. "Like my approach to relationships before," Derek said quietly, focusing intently on the distributor cap he was examining, not maintaining them properly until problems became too big to ignore. The personal reflection caught me off guard. "That's a perceptive comparison." He looked up, his expression unguarded. "The past few months have been eye-opening, working with Thomas at the community workshop, thinking about the kind of father I want to be. I've realized how much of life is about maintenance, not just acquisition." I nodded, recognizing the genuine evolution in his thinking. That's a valuable insight for anyone to have. "I owe it to this truck," he said, patting the fender affectionately, "and to you for not giving up on me when I was being an entitled jerk." "Family gives second chances," I replied simply. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the occasional clink of tools and the distant chirping of evening crickets. As we finished the tune-up, Derek carefully closed the hood, his hands now bearing the honorable smudges of mechanical work. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Completing your first tune-up?" "Surprisingly satisfying," he admitted. "There's something gratifying about understanding how things work, about having the knowledge to maintain something yourself." "That's why I've done this all my life," I told him. "It's not just about saving money or being self-sufficient. It's about the relationship you build with the things you care for." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I get that now. I never understood it before. Why someone would choose to maintain something old when they could just buy something new. But there's value in the history, in the continuity." We cleaned up the garage together, organizing tools and disposing of the used oil properly. As we finished, Derek glanced at his watch. "Jessica should be home soon. Would you and Thomas like to come over for dinner tomorrow? We want to show you the nursery. It's finally finished." "We'd love to," I accepted, touched by the invitation. The following evening, Thomas and I drove the freshly tuned truck to Jessica and Derek's Victorian in Lakeview Heights. As we pulled into their driveway, I noticed something unexpected: a small, newly constructed garage at the side of the property, its design complementing the home's historic architecture. "That's new," Thomas commented, eyeing the structure. Curiously, Derek greeted us at the front door, his smile wider than usual. "Perfect timing. Dinner's almost ready." Jessica embraced us both, her pregnancy now clearly visible at 5 months. "Mom, Dad, I'm so glad you're here. We have something to show you." After welcoming hugs and the obligatory admiration of Jessica's growing baby bump, Derek led us through the house to the back door. "We wanted to surprise you," he explained, leading us toward the new garage. He swung the doors open dramatically to reveal a pristine workspace, pegboards with organized tools, a sturdy workbench, proper lighting, and in the center, a partially disassembled vintage engine on an engine stand. "What is this?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "My project," Derek announced proudly, "with some guidance from Thomas and the community workshop." Thomas smiled beside me. He's been quite committed. Hasn't missed a Saturday session in weeks. I approached the engine, immediately recognizing it as a Ford Y-block, the same type as in my truck, though in much rougher condition. "Where did you find this?" I asked, examining the corroded components. "Salvage yard outside of Riverdale," Derek explained. Thomas helped me identify one worth restoring. It's from a '54 Ford, not quite the same as yours, but close enough that the skills are transferable. "The idea," Jessica added, joining us in the garage, "is for Derek to restore it completely, learning all the systems in the process. Eventually, we might find a vehicle to install it in." I ran my hand over the engine block, noting the areas that would need the most work. "This is a serious undertaking," I observed. "It'll take months of consistent effort." "I know," Derek acknowledged. "That's the point. I want our child to grow up seeing that worthwhile things take time and dedication. That restoration is a valid alternative to replacement." The thoughtfulness behind the project, not just as a hobby, but as a deliberate statement of values he wanted to pass on, moved me deeply. "I'd be happy to offer guidance when you need it," I offered, "though it looks like you're already in good hands with Thomas." "We were hoping for both of your expertise," Jessica said. "Different perspectives, different techniques. A family project," Derek added meaningfully. During dinner, conversation flowed easily between topics: the baby, the upcoming lake house weekend, Derek's engine restoration. When Jessica brought out a photo album after dessert, I expected baby shower pictures or ultrasound images. Instead, she opened it to reveal photographs of my truck from the exhibition, professionally printed and carefully arranged. "We wanted to document everything," she explained. "For the baby, to show how a single old truck brought two very different families together." As we paged through the album, I was struck by the narrative it captured, not just of the truck's recognition, but of our families gradually blending over the course of that transformative weekend. There were candid shots I hadn't even noticed being taken. Derek learning about the engine from me, Thomas deep in conversation with Richard, Elaine and I laughing together at the award dinner. "This is wonderful," Thomas said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Derek turned to the final page, which held a single photograph of all of us gathered around the truck after the award ceremony, the trophy held jointly by Derek and me, our faces alight with shared triumph. "This one's my favorite," Derek said quietly. "The moment I finally understood what your truck really represented. Not just a vehicle, but a connection to something authentic and enduring." Jessica closed the album gently. "We've decided on a name for the baby," she announced. "If it's a boy, Thomas Richard, after both grandfathers." Thomas blinked rapidly, clearly moved. "And if it's a girl," Derek continued, "Margaret Elaine, Maggie for short." I felt my breath catch, unexpectedly emotional at the thought of a granddaughter carrying my name. "That's a wonderful choice. We want our child to embody the best of both families," Jessica explained. "The drive and ambition of the Harringtons, yes, but also the wisdom and authenticity of the Wilsons. The ability to see value where others miss it," Derek added, meeting my eyes with genuine respect. "To recognize that sometimes what appears weathered and ordinary at first glance might actually be the most precious thing of all." As we drove home that evening, the truck humming contentedly beneath us, Thomas reached over to squeeze my hand. "Who would have thought?" he mused. that this old truck would end up changing so many lives. I smiled, patting the familiar dashboard affectionately. Sometimes the most valuable things come in unexpected packages. And sometimes, Thomas added, the people who initially value them least end up appreciating them most of all. The truck rumbled steadily onward, carrying us home as it had for 35 years. Its true worth never in its market value, but in the connections it had forged, the legacy it had created, and the lessons it had taught about seeing beneath the surface to the treasure that lay within. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.